I do see people in the room who are reasonably familiar with the idea of DPGs and DPIs, although they may not have built it, but they sort of get the concept. And I also see people who are very new to the idea. It's a little bit of a difficult task, but nevertheless, I do it via sort of two parts. One, explaining examples of DPIs that we built at population scale that sort of changed the way the systems evolved around the DPI. Just to get a sense, not to take it to heart, but rather you'll get a sense of, what are the key characteristics of those DPI, and what are the things we did that triggered the change, subsequent changes. So that's one way to sort of start thinking about it. Then I'll end with few ideas to think about. Ideas, I'm not a climate change specialist, so I've not thought about this field at all. But it of course concerns everyone. So I'm happy to be here supporting you. I'll give you some sort of what you call principles of thinking DPIs, and hopefully that sets up nicely for subsequent conversation. And as Tanuj was saying, I don't expect you to come out of this room today with clear understanding of what are the DPIs for climate change or public finance. Public finance may be slightly better, but because I know there's some work already going on, so maybe there is some shape and form to that DPI in there. But for climate change, it may be many more conversation might have to happen before you can distill what is actually the DPI that can subsequently trigger change. So I think this is very important to understand. But just to, I have a deck. I'll go through that and I'll open up questions. If you have questions in the middle, you can ask me. But generally, it might be okay to wait till the end, so that allows me to go to bed earlier. So I don't have to hang around here longer. Internet is the digital public infrastructure, right? It's a very, very one of the more digital. If you were digital, of course, physical infrastructure we all know. Internet is a very, very good example of it. By the way, internet may be too complex for you, but email is a public infrastructure, right? That is allowing all kinds of innovations around email and many app solutions that can communicate. That's a great example of it. And then what is the actual DPI with respect to email? It is just one document. That's all the DPI was. It's called SMTP, right? It's a simple mail transfer protocol. So someone, set of academicians sat together, defined how to create interoperable messaging as a protocol and published that. And then people innovated around it. Microsoft Exchange Server, earlier IBM, Lotus email servers, later Google and Hotmails, and things have come and gone. These innovations are all built on that one document, and that one document became the DPI, right? In that sense, that allowed interoperable communication to happen. These examples are also important to keep in mind because by itself, it doesn't solve anything. DPIs by itself doesn't solve anything, but it allows the ecosystem to create solutions around it. So keep these things in mind as you hear I go through the India's journey and then end with few principles. So hopefully it is useful to you to subsequent session today to think about it. Let me share. Okay. Just let me know if you are able to see.
Yes, we can.
Okay, they're able to see. Okay. So I'm just loading up. Okay, so I'll try to go through it fast because the idea is not to understand the specificity about specific DPIs in India. It's about the minimalism. What was it trying to do? What was the characteristics around that could be imitated for something in another domain? That's what you need to look for. Again, these are all characteristics of any complex system. So it's important to understand climate change, as you were explaining earlier. It's a multidimensionally complex system, and there is no one single solution fix to it. So that diversity and complexity, the large, extremely large problem, very diverse situations. This is what India is all about, right? So it was same for us. When we take up anything in India, we see the massive population. These 22 official languages are native. By the way, Bangalore, where I am from, we actively speak 109 languages. So, it's just that you can see the diversity of the system that is there, with economic diversity, language diversity, and everything else. But Indians are also getting connected fast to internet. This calls for a different approach. This is why it's important. Diversity calls for a different approach. And this was, why DPI allows exponential change to happen and not a linear solutioning to happen. And it's important to understand that aspect. I think somebody's mic is on. I can hear an echo. Okay. It's okay, I think now. When we were embarking on the identity program, India had only 17% of people who could bank in the banking system. This is just a number, right? It's just out of 1.4 billion population, 920 million adults, we only have 17 million with bank accounts. That was a terrible state to be in. And we were also very much a socialistic regime with lots of direct subsidies. So subsidy programs are in everywhere: health subsidies, farmer subsidy, electricity subsidy, cooking gas subsidies, women support subsidies, scholarships and pension and so on. Lots of that adding up at that time, 50 billion. Now it's much more. It's about 75, 80 billion US dollars every year spent on people. But we were actually having a lot of issues with both financial inclusion, reaching the benefits to the right people. These are all examples of that. But we did, and we also looked at the market. When you look at the market even now, we are still improving, by the way. It's very, very weird to understand that such a large society, we only have less than 10% of who have access to most products, formal products and services. So banking has changed, but lending, for example, we are still very poor in terms of lending to SMEs or individuals. We lend to really large institutions, but the lending institutions are just barely changing. So there are a lot of things that are healthcare, access to healthcare, access to primary care, for example, or access to good education. They're all still limited, very limited. Primarily, we were distilling down the cost structures. Why is the market providers of these products not going after the 100, 200, 300 million people? Instead, they used to go after 20, 30 million people out of the 900 million, right? Very small population. And that's because their cost of acquisition, cost of customer acquisition, cost of engagement, cost of trust was very, very high. So an SME walks into a bank wanting a lending offer. They know nothing about the SME. It's all paperwork. So lots of paper, untrusted paperwork. So the cost of verifying, cost of trust, and cost of processing is so high. I would rather say no to that person because it's not economically viable. It's not business viable to do business with a small SME who's seeking $500 loan. It doesn't even make sense to the banking system to give such a small loan, right? So I think this is a pattern that you will see everywhere. When you start looking at solutions at scale, you will see the cost of solutioning and cost of trust, the cost of data, for example, is so high that it's almost impossible to reach the last mile. But today, this is the difference DPI is making for us. 10 years fast forwarded. By 2020, during the COVID time, we were doing 70 billion. Last year, we spent 70 billion US dollars directly to the bank account of the people in India, all in this one decade, right? We went from sub 20 bank penetration to 80 plus penetration. $70 billion were sent down directly to people. And we have many schemes, like 300 odd schemes are already what's called a direct. And India runs now the world's largest cash transfer program, right? And we have 600 million unique people who are financially addressable. They can be sent money directly. So when the COVID lockdown happened, I think you guys were writing checks. We were actually transferring money instantly with 1/700th of a dollar. Cost of money transfer is about 1/700th of a dollar. It's so cheap that the digital public infrastructure has made such possibilities happen. And COVID was not expected. But it happened, a country was able to leverage such digital infrastructure for newer solutions that were never imagined originally. So that is something to keep in mind. And this is a study that shows India would have taken 46 years to get from sub 20% in 2011. 46 years we would have taken to get to 80% of the bank account. But actually, it only took 6 years. So this is a non-linearity that we must keep in mind. Thinking deep infrastructure allows combinatorial and exponential change to happen, not a linear change to happen. That exponential change is actually happening in India. Why instead of we compress the 4 decades in giving bank accounts to people to flat 6 years. So there's an enormous difference that is making. But all this happened because, and this is important, that's the topic of today, is not because the banking system did a better job at opening bank branches everywhere. It is not because banking systems improved their solutions. It's because India invested in some underlying, as Kevin was saying, interoperable building blocks, like Lego blocks, digital Lego blocks. That by itself is not a solution, by itself didn't solve, but it allowed the ecosystem to solve big, larger challenges. So allowing the ecosystem to solve, internet, that's what it is, right? Internet by itself is not a solution. Internet is an infrastructure. On top of, we can now hail taxis or order food or TaskRabbit coming and fixing a doorknob at home, right? So these solutions emerge from the ecosystem, by the ecosystem, for the people, on top of a shared infrastructure. So the idea is to think about what could be that shared infrastructure, shared set of building blocks, not solution. Don't try solving, try imagining what are the minimum building blocks that could trigger a nonlinear innovation by the ecosystem, not by you. Not all of us can solve, by the people locally. And this started with identity as a project, as people mentioned, Aadhaar. We started in 2010, and we are now 1.33 billion people in India have digital identity. They are digitally authenticable. 1.3 billion. What can you use it for? Any solution that can imagine. Now, these are, even though countries don't have it, Kevin was mentioning about MOSIP, or Seth was mentioning about MOSIP. MOSIP is an open source DPG that is allowing other countries to, similar to India, other countries to build identity individually. They can't solve climate problem. They can't solve financial inclusion problem. They can't solve healthcare problem. But they can do one thing really well at population scale. Make sure everyone has an identity that digitally verifiable. That's it. That's one Lego block, that one block. And that itself creates innovation around it, right? So we, in India today, month on month, does 1.3 billion authentications, ID authentications on top of it, because at least 300, 400 million people use it every month. 500 million people use it every month. Others. A lot of us don't have to because we are the upper side of the society, but at the bottom of the society, very, very large population using it. Now, this can be used without connectivity. Aadhaar allows you to use without connectivity, with feature phone connectivity, 2G connectivity. So we have designed it in such a way that it is inclusive and it is diverse, usable at diverse contexts. So as a DPI provider, identity platform people build something that can be embedded in many, many solutions in diverse contexts, connected context, smartphone context, no phone context, and so on. That's what it was important. So design that one block to be used in many places. And that's what I won't spend much time on Aadhaar itself. It's just extremely simple. The only identity system in the world that only captures 4 attributes about you. And all it does is one thing really well, is identity authentication. So identity was imagined not as a card, rather as a platform on top of which hundreds of ecosystem solutions can be built by the ecosystem, not by identity provider. And think, so DPI is about enabling that one block that allows someone else to build lots of solutions on top of that. Then we went on to build payment infrastructure. And here again, why is digital infrastructure? Because the only thing payment did, look, this is very interesting. The only thing we did through UPI, Unified Payment and Aadhaar Payment, is to allow money to be moved instantly from one bank account to another bank account, or a bank account to mobile wallet, mobile money, and so on. We are interoperable in India across wallets, mobile money, and banks. We have a strong regulator, thankfully, so we supported that. But the DPI itself is not the money. It's not like Venmo. There's no app. There are no solutions. Solutions were built on top of it by ecosystem. The UPI, Unified Payment, or Aadhaar Payment underlying as an infrastructure is just an open specification. And people refuse to believe it. But UPI is nothing but a one-page specification. That was the DPI. That triggered $1 trillion to be transferred last year from many banks to many banks. And we do pretty much, I mean, in India, when you come, you will see the revolution happening. And so UPI was, here is a word, an open protocol, just a one-pager document, an open protocol that creates interoperability, across the ecosystem and ensures the ecosystem can indeed develop applications on top of that. And if you look at it, UPI and Aadhaar together enabled payments, real-time payments for people who have no phones. They can do it with fingerprint. People who have feature phones, they can do it on USSD or through SMS. And people with smartphones can build it on smartphone. So the DPI was built as a very, very broad, offline, online, connected, smartphone, feature phone. So it's called inclusive design for the DPI. But the applications that were built by the ecosystem on top of it were wide-ranging applications, by the way. Banks built it. And this is why last year, we have 314 banks and mobile wallets, 66 applications, 22 languages. Apps are available in 22 languages. Millions of merchants are onboarded. Last month, we did 6.2 billion transactions on UPI. It's just, real-time payments in India went bonkers last year. And this year, we are even 5 times. We are going to go 5 times from last year. And this is because, including Google Pay, including WhatsApp Pay, including PhonePe, which is a Walmart-based company, there are hundreds of apps like this. So we have not one Venmo. We have many, many Venmos. But we're all depending on that one-page digital public infrastructure specification, open spec that we built. So this is very important to understand. The DPI is not the solution. DPI is the underlying building block that enables exponential growth by the ecosystem, exponential solutioning. Now, distilling that is the key. I think you guys will have to sit in the afternoon, brainstorm many days to see what could be those building blocks for climate change. And now we are doing data. So the last thing on top of that we did is identity, payments, and data. And data infrastructure, again, is twofold. One is on the credentialing, verifiable credentialing, because I talked about cost of trust is very high which is why most people can't access lending offers and so on, is because they cannot prove their claims. So the verifiable credentialing and verifiable data protection. Again, this is a global public good. DEPA is nothing but an open protocol allowing, like what SMTP did to email and UPI did to payment, DEPA is doing to exchange data from two systems. But user controlled, user consented, and user controlled. So a billion people today can harness their digital footprints and actually use that to access products and services that otherwise they could not have access to because of the cost structures. And the first network was our payment data infrastructure. So this is live for the last 1 or 2 years. We have a billion accounts now connected to the payment infrastructure. This is an open, decentralized network that allows individuals to harness financial data and from data providers and actually exchange end-to-end encrypted. No central system, completely decentralized, but driven by one set of open specification called DEPA. So this is important. Again, the DPI was very, very simple. But then you have to build ecosystem, then you have to build regulatory support, then you have to build innovation on top of that. So journey is not easy, but distilling that DPI was key. But I think Kevin was mentioning about, while the horizontal DPIs are somewhat understood, the vertical DPIs, what is the DPI for health? What could be the DPI for education and skilling? What could be the DPI for urban governance, where our smart cities are going crazy with the growth and so on? These are the things that we are building right now. So we have something called health stack, that is a set of digital public infrastructure elements, building blocks. Again, think building blocks, Lego blocks, no solution. That is specific to healthcare. Primarily in three forms: access to healthcare, building blocks that enables access to healthcare, building blocks that enables affordability of healthcare, and building blocks that enable data of healthcare, both personal healthcare data and open data. Healthcare and wellness require a lot of open data for policymakers to know disease surveillance, what's going on, and so on. So we are enabling both personal data and open data under that building block. None of them are solutions. So don't think of them as apps and portals and websites and so on. These are very, very underlying building blocks that will allow health tech companies, hospitals, and various systems, lab systems, to leverage those building blocks to create a unified health network. So the idea is to create unification, unifying the fragmented system and enhance the capability of the actors in that ecosystem. Not solve them, not solve it for them. Simply enhance the capability of those actors so that they can do a better job at solving those problems. And the last one here is the open network. Tanuj alluded to that. Very audacious attempt India is making, because our commerce infrastructure is either fragmented or there are one or two large sort of monopoly like Amazon or Uber that is starting to create regulatory issues and both ground up opposition for these large platforms. So India is creating an open, decentralized commerce infrastructure on top of, like internet, think internet, like internet, on top of which many commerce platforms and commerce apps can interoperate between them. Instead of saying we only have one large platform or monopoly or a duopoly, we want to make sure the underlying infrastructure is a public infrastructure that allows innovation by many people, not just by one large company. So we are doing, all these are actually in public domain. I don't want to take too much time today. Much of this information is available as DPGs, and many of them are actually in DPGA registry and so on, many of these components, okay? So India took a very independent, good, interesting stance on this, that we were, before 90s, we were like this, government was doing everything. That is also a monopoly. That's also a problem because eventually government surveillance, all those questions come up. But the US, post 2000, seemed to have outsourced everything to big tech. And that drives towards a winner take all, walled garden approach to innovation. And that doesn't solve either. So, but India is taking somewhat a middle ground. We are asking ourselves, what are those digital building blocks which are minimal in nature, but allows combinatorial innovation to happen by the market, by the society, instead of sort of solving everything for them? Because few people in a room cannot offer a full climate solution to the world. It should be driven by ground up. But for them to do, it has to be cost effective, capacity has to be built, data has to be provided, tools have to be provided. So, what are those tools and underlying infrastructure that enable such innovation is the real ask. And India thankfully brought both policy, digital infrastructure, all three of them, and market innovation in a nice together for us to create this non-linear leap. And leading to formalization, because as I was telling you, most otherwise the entire more than 90% of the adult population was in an informal economy, not at all in a formal economy. And that great divide doesn't work for us. So we had to create inclusive environments for us. So now we are getting 200, 300, 400 million into formal economy, into banking system, savings, healthcare, and so on. And so I'll end with this. So when you think DPI, think about what do you start with? What can you start with? Start with a change that triggers further exponential change. And DPI thinking requires a decade-long view. Because if you think maybe climate, we won't have that much time. I don't know whether we have that much time for climate changes, but nevertheless, there's no way a global or a population scale infrastructure can actually be like internet. Took decades. So these days we see roughly about a decade for any digital public infrastructure. So you have to start with a change that can trigger subsequent change. What is the one thing you can start today that at population scale, not in silo, not in one village or one town? What can you do one thing today that will actually trigger the next change and the next change much more rapidly? And then you get onto that cycle, right? So you have to unbundle your thinking into very, very foundational elements. You cannot think like a solution. Oh, we want to solve this, we want to solve. To solve that, what can we give? To solve that, what can you give? To give that, what can you give? You have to really unbundle into very, very core atomic elements in your mind to get to that first thing you want to start with. Always, it's very difficult for most people who are experts in domain or product and technology experts want to do more. In fact, for DPI thinking, you have to do less. That means you have to look for absolutely minimal interoperable building blocks that can trigger that change, then subsequent change, and so on. Always identify what is the plus one. And the plus one is defined as the whole system, whole population, large scale population moves to a new equilibrium from which there is no return. So today in India, no one can go back without digital payments. No one can go back without internet. Nobody can go back in the world itself, right? Nobody can go back without internet anymore. So these are all plus one steps. So in climate, what can you do as a plus one step that changes the entire equilibrium of the system to a positive next equilibrium from which there is no going back? And then a series of plus one takes you to a decade-long transformation. If you try to solve everything together, you'll have a problem. And then think forest. Don't think plantation. Basically, think a way to create the soil for the forest to evolve. So you are asking the question, what is that digital soil that will trigger that forest to evolve? But the solution thinking is a plantation thinking. Everybody shall do the same thing. I know what the solution should be, and everybody will use the solution. For DPI people, you should not be thinking solution. You should let that forest bloom naturally, organically. But you have to create the soil and the supporting system for that to happen. So it's about unification and not uniformity. You don't want uniformity because diversity should be our fundamental assumption we are making. And then always think ecosystem, ecosystem, ecosystem. It's very hard for people to say, I know how to solve, I can solve, instead of saying, I don't know how to solve. But if I give few building blocks, I can catalyze an ecosystem that can do a better job at whatever they are doing today. Can they do a better job by giving better data, better support, better funding, better tools, and so on? So what can you do for the ecosystem that allows the ecosystem to do a exponential leap? That's important. And do not ever try doing everything. It's all about catalyzing innovation on top of DPI. So it's about simplicity of that DPI that you want to think about. A little bit hard, a little bit philosophical, but I know that it is possible if you put your brain together. If you think through this and distill it and ask the distillate and then come to the core atomic elements of what we can do, it could completely change the way 5 years later that we could be looking at a climate tech and climate support and local ecosystem changing behavior. Because behavior change by the society requires lots of series of plus one steps, because there are people, humans don't change habits, right? And this is why this second line is key here. DPIs are not about solving. DPI is about distributing the ability to solve. You should be distributing the ability to someone else to solve it. And that's DPI thinking. Not distributing solutions, distributing the ability to solve. And that's where the building block thinking is very, very essential for you. Okay, I'll stop. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Pramod. We'll let anybody who has questions on Zoom, if you can raise your hand, or if in the room, if you have questions for Pramod.
Did I put everyone to sleep?
No.
More than a question, I think I kept a reflection of what you were saying. That and to emphasize to my colleagues that we have been discussing this for a couple of days now, is that it's not, just to emphasize that it's not the e-payments that is the DPI. It's not digital identity that is the API, but the DPI, but rather the protocol, the schema, the standard that is underneath these things. That is the DPI. So I think that is very helpful to the question that we were raising in the beginning from Gerardo and I. So no, just wanted to bring this. It's not a question.
Yeah, no, it doesn't have to be a question. I think what's running in your head. You share your thoughts, and that these conversations are useful for as you start going towards DPI for the domain that you care about.
I see. Aleem, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'm still absorbing from that was so incredible, actually. But what you said one thing that I'm still grappling with, right? Which you talked about building almost irreversible, interoperable building blocks around which we cannot imagine that equilibrium ever being the same again. And while that's incredibly powerful, and I think about something like the electricity grid, right? Or the internet, et cetera, and you can't imagine a world without it. But I wonder if in this world, particularly given concerns about privacy, et cetera, there might be building blocks that you might want to revisit or reimagine or redesign, given unintended consequences, unintended risks that emerge over a decade. Like, how do you think about that irreversibility if something unintended happens? Negative externalities in the world of economics.
No, I think, thank you, Aleem. It's very kind of you to, sort of think through these larger implications. The irreversibility is in the habit, societal habit. Irreversibility is not about building block being irreversible. It's like a tire in a car, goes flat, I can actually replace, and maybe something else come, and maybe now we have tubeless tires or newer technologies that are coming. Batteries can be changed with better batteries and so on. So I think the idea is not about replaceability is an important part of DPIs. Replaceability and evolvability isn't, because fundamental assumptions I make as an architect is that we do not know the future. If we think we know the future, we are just wrong. Okay, so I am assuming I don't know what's coming, point number one. Second, we are also assuming, a lot of times assume the solutions that we build today are not going to last longer because solutions for the future will require something else. So we are trying to figure out what are the, like GPS is going to stay long as a DPI.
Right.
But Uber app will change and something else will change, right? Solutions will change, come and go. But the fundamental converting you to the blue dot, where everybody is aligning around you, was a powerful plus one from which we can't go back anymore. So it's about societal habits. Yeah.
Right. So to make a distinction between the irreversibility of the underlying infrastructure and the replaceability of the app or the application.
Yeah, and also irreversibility of the habits of the society. We all, at a population scale, if someone needs to use that, it has to be designed in such a way that the habits are shifted. Because human beings are a habit machine, we don't change our routines and habits. Unless we change our habits, that one change won't happen. And that habit change requires significant plus one thinking to say, where are they now? Where are they now? From which, where can they do one thing forward from which they don't feel like ever going back, because that society has seen the power of it, and then from which they can't go back. It's like, turning out that bulb at home. There's no way you're going to go back to not having electricity after that, right? So it's what we have to identify those as well as you roll out the DPI. As you roll out the DPI, you have to be very, very conscious about what are those series of plus ones that a particular society can do. This is why sometimes it's like Apple, and we have seen, right? Apple II smartphones in '95, Newton, when Apple was showcasing Newton. It was just so ahead of time. It was not at all a plus one for the society, and it went dead until the iPhone came out 15 years later.
Thank you. Thank you.
I see a question from Ross, and then we'll have Sohaib next. Ross.
Thanks, Noj. So I'm Ross Ferguson. I'm a Director of Public Digital, and as Lorena and Gerardo were saying, we've been spending some days together noodling on DPI and PFM and where the two shall meet or not. And I think it's just a bit of a pick-up on Lorena's question and I think reflection. I think I need a bit more time on that. So, for example, you talked about UPI, and you talked about the DPA protocol. And I think that what Lorena was saying was that the protocol was the DPI. But is UPI not also an example of digital public infrastructure? Or is it the protocol is DPI and then UPI or Aadhaar or something like that is an application built on top of it? Where would you help us out with the conceptualization of these things?
Good question. So let's take UPI. So UPI's protocol had to be operationalized by someone. So the National Payment Corporation of India, under the central bank in India, a not-for-profit entity set up for enabling payment in India, was ready to say, I will take that protocol and create a vibrant real-time payment network. For that to happen, they were the facilitator of creating that network. So they created a UPI network. Think of like internet. Internet to work, you need domain name service, DNS services. We need basic gateways and relay protocols, and basic servers are on the internet, allowing you to say, oh, I can go to the website now using my browser, right? For that to happen. So someone was facilitating those infrastructure to come about. So National Payment Corporation of India used UPI protocol to create that infrastructure. That infrastructure is the DPI. So UPI plus the network is together the DPI. And all the apps on top of it, like the Google Pay, WhatsApp Pay, Amazon Pay, all these applications on top of it are apps on top, like internet and Uber and Amazon. Think of that way, right? So the DPI was just the open network. What is open network? A network allowing people, apps to connect, banks to connect. So they came up with the participation rules. So there was why is it important to understand? To operationalize DPI, you need a facilitating organization in every country. You need a facilitating organization. Typically a not-for-profit, because if it's a public good, you want a not-for-profit like organization. That not-for-profit organization, what we call a network facilitating organization, what we call as NFOs. Network facilitating organization decide what is the protocol, what are the policies for the network. Is there a small charge to connection to the electricity grid, to connect to the is there a charge structure there? Is there security rules for people to connect? Is there privacy rules or any other rules of participation? So they co-created that network, but they were not the operating entity. They were not operating apps. Apps and banks were all at the end of that network. On the edges of that network were all the apps and networks. So think of this like electricity grid. I hope vaguely I answered. Yeah.
Could I just ask a build on that? Sorry, Pramod, thank you for that. So could I understand then that DPA, might be pronouncing that incorrectly as well, so sorry if that's frustrating, and UPI were perhaps examples of infrastructure that combined, and that was their power? Because it sounds like they could have existed independently, but that they combined to create an innovative opportunity, an ecosystem, contribute to the ecosystem.
In fact, that is essential. Combinability of that building block is very, very key for you to create this non-linear change in the ecosystem. Because again, even environment, if you look at it, there is all kinds of systems, people, institutions in play. So you are saying you should be able to, what you put out, the digital public infrastructure must be combinable with the existing infrastructure. And every such infrastructure comes about, country comes about, ID comes. When ID only happened in India, we didn't see that much of a change. When ID and payment came, we saw suddenly a much faster change. And ID, payment and data, these three are no more. 1 + 2 + 3 is suddenly becoming exponential innovation possibilities. Now with commerce, the commerce network is combining lending protocol, payment protocol, identity, and all that thing to put together the best commerce experience. So it's just, it's an amazing thing. That's why the Lego block sort of imagination is important, saying that the ecosystem can combine these blocks provided from different people. You cannot try building all the blocks either. That's also important to understand. You can try starting with few blocks, but it encourages others to contribute few more blocks, and hopefully together it starts creating that exponential wheel of change. But it's a long play. It's important to understand. Okay, we have to have patience. Capital is a virtue here. Patience is very, very key for us to be able to do this.
So we have 5 more questions. So I'm going to ask you all to be brief and direct to Pramod. Sohaib, and then just for everyone's sake, we'll have Gerardo and then Kay.
Thank you, Chandra.
And Catherine.
Yeah, we'll go in order. Heidi and Catherine next.
Thank you, Dr. Pramod. My name is Sohaib Nandhar from the IMF Digital Advisory Unit. I work a lot with our FPD colleagues present in this room. Fascinating presentation and really like very refreshing way of thinking about DPIs. My question is just about the challenges that came across when developing each of these DPIs, because they're very different by nature, but at the same time, because they're interconnected from Aadhaar to UPI to the data exchange layer. What are some of the, if you could highlight 1 or 2 challenges, because these could be very interesting to highlight in our board paper, because I really try to see these as like the foundation for a government to become more digital. But at the same time, it's about understanding those risks that you can't avoid these whatsoever, but you can understand them and manage them better. And this could be very important to build that resilience as building those DPIs. I'm not saying that they're going to make a copy paste directly of India stack, but they will. They need to understand and build this resilience throughout this digitalization journey of countries.
Great question. I think Tanuj might also cover some of that in a session about like UPI, the challenges and so on. I mean, he's been part of the journey as well. So in his session, he'll cover some. Almost all challenges are non-technical. So technologies like us find it the easiest. That challenges are political in nature. Challenges are lack of ecosystem readiness in nature. Challenges are societal readiness. So societal readiness, ecosystem readiness, political regulator readiness. Always been the 3 critical challenges that we have to. So a lot of us who are in this, we mean the group of people who are crazy doing all this building in India, watch for opportunities. So we are always watching the trends. Okay, now that we have smartphone penetration, suddenly now that internet is taking off, could that be the right time for us to launch the next DPI? So the launching the DPI requires political/regulatory readiness, ecosystem readiness, because you depend on ecosystem to actually solve the problem, because you can't solve it. And the third, the societal readiness, that if people are not ready to absorb some of that and embrace some of that and see value in everyday life, millions of people don't derive value in everyday life, it will be ejected like an alien particle and it will just die very, very quickly. So I think these continue to be the 3 biggest challenges. There is no one good answer to them. It's just, I think, some examples I talked about, +1 thinking, even regulator. I'll give you +1 thinking is a very, very powerful. It's not only for society, even for regulator. By the way, if we had taken UPI to central bank in 2009 or 10, they would have rejected it. 2015 made perfect sense to them. It was one of those things, right? So it's because suddenly they already had a real-time push payments called IMPS in India. That means like a Zelle in the US, right? We already had that working. So they had tested the idea of real-time payment, central bank. They realized the aspirational India is getting smartphones and connectivity is happening. They already saw 600 million people with Aadhaar identity opening bank account. Now, so all that aided, saying 2015 was a perfect time for us to launch. And of course, then COVID and everything else helped us accelerate digital, but nevertheless, even without that, we would have been, I think, successful. So that +1 is for all 3. We are the political and regulatory +1. What are they ready for? What is ecosystem ready for? And what are people on the ground ready for? And this is a very, very interesting conversation you should have even with the climate change. It will be very interesting. What are they ready for change? I don't know. It'll be very interesting. People are not idiots. People are not purposely making stupid things. I would think people are forced to live in conditions and throw around stuff because they have bigger problems to fry, bigger fish to fry or whatever, right? Issues in their life. So there might be interconnected problems that you might have to deal with as you navigate this terrain. But again, for all of you, been there, discussing, understand this. So keep that in mind. I think the +1 thinking for those 3 challenges is extremely key.
Okay, next up we have Gerardo.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation and for the concepts. Were really helpful to understand a little more these ideas. I have just 3 specific questions. The first one is related to the causality that you have mentioned, because you are saying that DPI is basically develop the minimum building blocks to promote the solution of the problem by the ecosystem. So you need to know the problem first. And based on which are the problem, then you say, okay, I will not develop the solution, but I will put in place some of the minimum building blocks that I think will help to solve this problem. In fact, in your head, you have some kind of idea of how the solution looks like. If not, it's really difficult to understand, okay, I will put this and let's see what's going on. So it's not so clear for me, this relationship that about, well, let's put the things on the field and let's see what's going on. And related to that, it looks like that this is more like a DPIs per sectors than DPIs for the economy in general. That we are trying to identify some specific issues that we could resolve in certain areas, and we call this DPI. From the IMF point of view, with the word public, we have a problem, because for us, public means something very specific in terms of not rivalry, not exclusion. And when we present this idea of DPIs in the context of a institution that is composed by economies, it's not so well received. So it's something that we need to think a little about. And my last point is related to you say that the UPI protocol should be operated. Somebody needs to put this in place and run in this idea. And in the case of OPI, it was the central bank. And also you need the network facilitator organization. Yeah. Should be something different than the government, that network facilitator organization, since you need to establish the regulation, you need to establish the security. So if you could give us a little more explanation on these 2 points, the public that we will not discuss here, it will be great.
Yeah, this is a good part about being neither an expert nor a policymaker. People like us, we can just build. We don't have to worry about all these words like public and not public, but you have to worry about it. So I appreciate it. The first point, most of the time, the problem statement, when we say problem, is not the real problem. So we ask always, it takes time, but that is what I think group of people like you have to ask the problem behind the problem. So let me give you, many times you have to unbundle the problem itself, not jumping into solution. Let me tell you example, a direct benefits transfer. India wanted to transfer benefits to people, but we can't transfer. Middlemen, stealing, it's very inefficient. There is no way to, send all this money to people, a ton of problems. So we don't jump immediately to say, oh, we understand the problem. No, we ask the question, so why is that not working? Then they'll say, oh, you know what, we don't have bank accounts. So if they don't have bank accounts, they don't want to use this. Because of the bank accounts, we can't do anything. Then we ask the question again, why behind the why? So you have to keep asking why behind the why in the problem statement. Get to the one thing that you know for sure you need to do. So the second question we are asking is, oh, bank account. Why is bank account not there? Why are they not opening bank account? Then they would say, oh, we have 650,000 villages. It's not viable to bank to open branches in all those places. And banking regulation requires identity card, PMLA rules, Money Laundering Act, KYC. So I can't seem to open bank account. It's not cost viable. It's not viable for a bank, to run a bank. Okay. So we ask them, so why do they have to open a branch at all? Then they would say, oh, that requires digital banking to happen. Okay, bank account needs to be opened. Then we ask, why can't they open the bank account? At least open the bank account. It's a starting point. Then they would say, no, KYC can't be done. Then we would say, we literally identified saying, if we could do one thing, a digital ID and an online KYC, paperless KYC, instant paperless KYC with their fingerprint, we know for sure that it will open bank account. We don't know yet whether the direct benefits transfer will happen. So this is what we call necessary condition, not sufficient. So we always look for necessary condition to be satisfied. So we unbundle problem, look for some things that you anyway have to do. Without this, next change won't happen. But that alone won't solve the problem. Just don't hope just because we gave ID card doesn't mean it will naturally solve everything else. It won't. But is ID card necessary? ID necessary for everybody? Absolutely. And if ID could open a KYC, could we open a bank account instead of $3 per bank account opening? Could we do it in 10 cents? Yeah. Then if you do that, will you open the bank account? Then they say, yeah, we will open the bank account. We do ID, right? So we have to do that one thing. So you are always going after, ask problem, why behind the why. Ask a lot of questions about the problem itself. Now, one of the good things, that's why I was telling Gerard, good thing about a lot of us, we are not ID experts. We are not policy experts. I'm not a payment expert. I'm not a commerce expert. I'm not healthcare expert. But actually, I can imagine health stack. Because I'm not an expert. So one of the expertise weighs down on you. Okay, just be very wary of it. That because you already know the problem statement, you already know what the solution. Then you are stuck in that loop, right? People like us have no clue. So that makes it easier for us to think about identity. And the last question you were asking, the NFO. Yes, we have learned that government, especially in India, the government bureaucracy, the machinery gets very slow, gets very bureaucratic by definition, and gets sort of innovation unfriendly very soon. So one of the things India has been successfully doing is to create this independent NFOs or NIUs, National Information Utilities, or Network Facilitating Organization. We are creating that systematically. So we are creating one for commerce, one for payment, one for account aggregator, the DIPA. We have created an NFO. So we are creating this NFO as a arm's length away from things, but as a facilitating for the ecosystem. Because the focus is actually on the ecosystem. Focus is not about regulating or controlling. So if you have a control mindset and a regulation mindset, you can never do a friendly ecosystem innovation mindset. So we have at least seen in India that has worked well. I'm not sure if other countries might have different structures that you might have to imagine. But for India, definitely this arm's length institutions, not-for-profit institutions work very well.
Okay.
Hi, Pramod. Thank you. This is brilliant as always. Again, for those of you I don't know, I'm Kay McGowan, the Digital Impact Alliance. I think, like many others here, I'm really circling around this phrase, distributing the ability to solve, as being, really one of the most beautiful concepts of DPI. And yet, I often find that so much of the energy and financing and program design around digital transformation is very much focused on e-government, right? And on e-government services and public service delivery. And I think one of the things that India has done that's so unique is that if you're thinking about these building blocks, you're thinking not just about critical public service delivery, but also the opportunity to innovate in the private sector. And I was wondering if you could spend a little bit more time reflecting on that point, because even other initiatives like GovStack, which I know you're engaged in advising, they fall into this trap, right? Where it's very much, even though they get the building blocks, they get the interoperability, it's still, I worry that they're building for just public services without thinking about the private sector as well. And so I'm wondering if you could reflect on that for a little bit. And then I think in the case of ID payments, data exchange, it's very easy for all of us to understand the potential for private sector innovation. But how do you think about this as you're building DPI, like the health stack and other more sectorally focused DPI?
Yeah. So, for example, these are very relevant when it goes down to agri stack. We are making agriculture stack, digital stack for agriculture. We're asking the question, what are those DPIs that would change the lives of that farmer, right? Particularly, is it digitizing land registry, credentialing them with their own land ownership? If one thing you can hand over to them with a provable land credential, could that change access to capital for them? We are asking these questions. Can they access better capital because they have a verifiable credential with them, the land ownership? And if you can give them the last earning or what they made in the last, the crop information digitally and verifiable manner, could that change their ability to plant the next crop or get support for planning on the next crop from the ecosystem and so on? So it's a very interesting question. And when it comes to health and agri, this is very important. When we talk about DPI, the innovation does not necessarily have to come from private sector. In India, we use the word Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar. What do you mean? Samaj means society, Sarkar means government, and Bazaar means market players, right? We want all of them to innovate because each of them have a role to play. But for them to do their role, what is that we can give so that they can do a better job? So ID enabled government to cleanly benefit transfer directly to bank account of people. So it is ID benefited government and private sector for them to be able to do, like Uber would verify the driver's identity using Aadhaar, and that would actually is a private sector innovation, whereas government innovated for direct benefits transfer. So it's important, and it's important that we never lose focus on if DPI is defined only for government, you're completely missing the point. If you define only for private sector, you're missing the point. You have to define think like internet. You have to define something that allows all three actors, society, government, and marketplace, to play their role. And if you can unify that energy, unify those marketplaces and governments and society, you can start people can connect themselves. For example, if there is a clean water drive, in my village, I want to be able to clean the rivers or the stream that's going by, and I need access to capital. The capital might come from societal funding or government funding, but how do they access it? Today, they're all silo. They're all vertical and silo. Some people are trying to solve. But so DPI is about creating an internet-like connected, unifying infrastructure that in turn allows opportunity for them to access capital, access information, access products, access services, and so on, cheaper, faster, and in an efficient way.
We have one more question from Catherine, and then I see some questions in chat from Ali. Devesh, ID, you had your hands up. You still want to go later? Okay. But Catherine first.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you, Dr. Parma. I don't come, I'm with UNDP. I'm a climate change specialist with UNDP, and I work on the policy side. I work on NDC especially. DPI is definitely very new to me. So putting it down and giving the example of India and really explaining it is super useful to me and to people that I will be talking to about this. No, I wanted to talk a bit about the policy barriers that you have encountered in India. In our experience, especially when it comes to data and communication of data, exchange of data, it's really, really difficult when you are talking about climate and when you work with government. Usually, data doesn't always exist, and when it exists, people keep it very close to their heart. So sometimes you have the policies that are there that will maybe constitute barriers to this exchange, or you don't have the policy and people are looking for a mandate to be able to exchange those data. So I was just wondering, in your case, was there any political regulatory barriers that you had to lift? Or did you just wait until the conditions were favorable to introduce any of the infrastructure that you worked on? Thank you.
Catherine, you pretty much answered yourself, I think. So when it comes to the open data, while it's sort of the dream come true for policymakers to have data available. Two things were very clear. One, centralized data collection, or what we were centralized, what most of the people do today, including policy folks who are doing impact analysis or any of that. They extract data. So central extraction, imagine those two words. Centrally, one time extract. It's like oil. It takes a lot of cost. Go down, extract the data. The mind, what we are shifting towards is decentralized, emit. That means data should get emitted from wherever they are instead of collecting upfront. So, because if cars are going by, it should emit the data that, this street is actually busy. This is what Google Maps did to us, right? The data is emitted to make better decisions. It shows you red color or blue color on the street because it was not, somebody is not going down and analyzing and extracting that data. It is emitted from everything that is going by. Digital technologies allow you to emit in a decentralized fashion. So that is an architectural shift we are making towards open data. But policymakers, Catherine, you're right. Governments, even Indian government for that matter, would be very, very, very wary of economic data, weather data, quality data, all that thing, because the narratives get created, political pressures get built up, so they want to play with the data and not put out everything. This is one of the reasons we want decentralized emit. If the street light is working, not working, we want those emitted, rather than government having to collect the data and one bureaucrat sitting and deciding, should I put the data out or not put the data out, right? We don't want that. Architecturally, we don't want to go towards that because you are giving power to someone who will not put the data out. So you want to be able to take the power out of them, like what Google and Uber and all these guys are doing. Simply use digital to emit, because data is already there in the villages or in the towns or in the cities. This data is already emitting. Can we emit more data? Now we ask the question. For example, we were looking at habit changes. One of the hardest habit change in India was to talk about air quality. And government would refuse to, sort of entertain such data. But air quality index, AQI, became a big thing, in Indian cities also, because it became a societal ask and because few things that you do, few private players starting to put up, in local places, what's your air quality everywhere. There was no central agency to say, I will collect and decide to put it out or not. It was actually being put out by various people. And that became, society started noticing. And now government cannot stop us from knowing that our city air sucks. right? Sometimes, it's very bad quality. And that the pressure mounts on the system to be able to do something about it. So look for decentralized emits and local actors bringing out this data rather than central actors bringing this data. Okay, this is very key, because if you give the power of data to someone, they won't give it back to you. This is very, very key. So, and this is why a lot of expertise, when you look at policy experts, again, this is me technology saying a little bit. I don't want data emits to be meaningful data. I don't care. It's like Google-like thinking. Let all different types of data get emitted. How to combine them and how to create insights should be left for policymakers and for research institutes and for others to come. Don't upfront think about that. I need this data, and for this outcome, and I know how to analyze it, and for that I'm collecting. That's a very what's called a pipe model of extraction. You are actually trying to extract the data so that you can do your policy or research. Instead of saying that if street light is working, do it. If groundwater is depleting, let that come out. If something else, air, wind data is coming out, let it come out. How to combine them? We don't know how to combine them. Experts will figure out how to combine them, right? Experts will create insights out of it. So unbundle the data emission, separated from knowledge creation out of that, and keep it decentralized. I think that's one thing we have seen, because centralized data collection, very, very hard for government, very tricky. Even in India, GDP data, all that data is very, very sensitive. So if governments have political, they play political games. It's very tricky to get them to put it out. So it's better to put it out through proxy data. So various types of data that tells you that something else is going on. So vaguely answering again, I'm not a policymaker, but I'm looking at how to solve large-scale data infrastructure. We are actually writing a paper on large-scale decentralized open data infrastructure. We are writing right now. So because healthcare surveillance, if you say no, everybody will collect and government health ministry will somehow analyze it and puts out data, it's never going to happen. So we want to be able to bring it out. So again, think about it. Open data is key, because we did work on water project with one of our partners in the groundwater project. It was very, very sensitive groundwater data, because groundwater is a resource that everybody is fighting for. So even putting out open data was actually tricky, because the villages would get, so much water in that area is not a good data because there are negative forces that wants to extract and play with that data, right? So groundwater was a very sensitive. Again, some of that not unsolved in my mind, but I suppose we'll discuss together later. Yeah. Tanuj, is that?
Yeah, that's mostly all the questions. I think Devesh had one more. And from the chat, I wanted you, Pramod, if you don't mind, this is a clarifying question. Anima sent a few comments, but the one question that I think others might also have is, when you say ecosystem readiness, can you expand how you define ecosystem in this context? Are you talking about other actors, other infrastructure, something else? I want to accentuate that question because your experience with Aadhaar, and Kay also asked a similar question, right? Like Aadhaar initially was probably not like a UPI where private memos were created. The users of the programs could be other government departments, etc., which are not necessarily known for their sort of innovation outlook, etc. Right? So, if when you talk about ecosystem, can you also maybe talk about how you encouraged other government organizations or bureaucracies, encourage them to adopt Aadhaar or DPI thinking in their solution?
Yeah. So yeah, Aadhaar as an identity. Identity was a sovereign function. So it had to be the identity issuance and identity attestation. Basically, an attestation had to be done by the government. It was not a private function for us. It was a government issued ID, was necessary for opening bank accounts and so on. So the identity, attestation of the identity, not of course, identity is with my identity is mine, but the government did an attestation, digital attestation of that. That was a sovereign function. So that couldn't be given to the issuance part of it. But the usage part was open to private and public ecosystem. So you can, that's what I was saying, when Uber recruits drivers, they need to do background checks and so on of the driver. And they could use Aadhaar to verify their identity, and they could get a background check done and all that thing. Similarly, when the government was using identity, they would use it for their benefit. So this takes us to Tanuj's second question. How did the government adopt Aadhaar? It's again, as a DPI builder, building just the DPI is barely the starting point. Getting the demand side of the DPI, not the supply side. Building is easy. Demand side is very hard. Demand comes from everybody else but you. That means others have to find value in using your DPI. So we had to co-create specific value proposition. So when we went to central bank, we created a different value proposition compared to a social protection ministry. When you go to a social protection ministry, when you go to healthcare ministry, we used to tell a different story about Aadhaar with respect to what their care is. What are they trying to solve? What are their problems? And how can digital identity help solve their problem? Because you can't sell, it's not a selling problem, right? You can't sell and force your ID on them. You force your DPI on them. So you have to really understand few killer use cases, killer applications for which you can go after. And once others see that killer applications working, they will say the FOMO, fear of missing out, start setting in. And then they will also want to use it, and more adopters start kicking in, right? It's a usual adopters curve. The early adopters, you have to identify an early adopter that is actually making an impact that allows the next adopter to come. So there is two things: identification of who can adopt. And for example, in India, we had many programs, but we did not go after fertilizer subsidy. We did not go after food subsidy using Aadhaar as a first exercise, because they were very sensitive topics, for both political and societal topics. We went after pension, scholarship, obvious things. Okay, we went after things that are, of course, they were almost ready for that digital change. So, and we went after cooking gas subsidy, which was also ready for that change. Once cooking gas was done successfully, they said, why can't we use it for other one? Of course, you can use it for other one. So you can use it for other one. And then now 310 schemes of government all use Aadhaar, right? So to directly transfer 70 billion, as I was telling last year. So, and the first question, Tanuj, is also ecosystem. Who are these ecosystems? Again, I was telling you all three: government, private, and NGO/societal bodies. Especially with climate, I would presume there are a lot of local NGOs, local societal bodies who are keen to participate and make a change in their environment. So you have to identify each of them who can leverage your DPI, and all of their readiness comes from what they are already doing. So they have to understand what are they doing today. What is the problem statement? Are they ready to embrace this? So you have to do a full turf analysis. This is adoption is the hardest problem. Okay, you have to discuss. You can discuss, but first identify necessary DPIs. Then you can think about adoption. I think if you can really distill into necessary condition, what are the necessary, absolute necessary, must-have DPIs for thing? You can ask the question: feasibility and viability question. Don't start asking feasibility question upfront, because you will be in a loop that you will start shooting down your own ideas. So do a design thinking, do a little bit of flair, ideate, and then look at the feasibility of are this ready, and which country is ready, which geography is ready. All the questions we must ask.
Okay, I think Devesh, final question. Then we should give the people in the room. Yeah.
Can I just ask a clarifying one before we end as well? But let Devesh go again.
Pramod, as we think about distilling are complicated problems a little bit. I've heard from some of your students in the past, things like thinking about key scenarios, key interactions, primary actions. As we go into the afternoon to discuss our problems a little bit more and distilling what we are working on, could you give us a bit of a direction on how do we go about distilling? So one you said was keep asking the why of the problem.
Yeah.
Are there other techniques or methods we can use to go into that distillation?
No, I think you can ask one more thing. For example, you definitely need to identify the problem statements, but problem statement not at the top level problem statement. You have to really break it down. So break the problem statement, breaking the problem statement, asking the why behind the why and why behind the why is an exercise you should do. Second, you should do, when you think about DPI, ask what is that one change, one thing that can actually make the next set of changes ready. So you can again write down the possible changes that you want to see. Imagine the change you want to see. And then for that, what tools and what things you want to give. And really, again, this is about, you can't take all of them together. So you have to ask the question, what is the one or two things that you can definitely do that you believe, truly, collectively believe, absolutely must. And this is obvious and we must do it. Then we must do the next one and so on. So getting to that obvious DPI is actually asking the question about what change do you want to see actually happen? Okay, those habit changes are important to imagine those changes to see.
Thank you.
Some visualization of that.
I just had a clarifying question.
Yeah, Elaine.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just the, I feel like you made a distinction between almost like base infrastructure DPI, like identity and UPI, versus sort of sector specific DPI, ag stack, tech, health stack. Like, do you see, how do you see them differently?
Actually, I don't see them differently, frankly.
Okay, you don't.
It's only it's the difference between completely context agnostic DPIs like identity, which has no context. You can use it for airline travel to anything you want to do, right? Identity is key everywhere. To slightly more context aware DPIs. So that's the only difference. But the methodology to arrive at the DPI remains common. Okay, it's important to think about that way. Agree, for example, we were looking at what are the one or two obvious things we must ensure the farmers have. Information asymmetry. So we analyze this information asymmetry, access asymmetry. Why are they not able to access capital? Why are they not able to access a market to sell their produce? Why is it only local farmers market? Why can't farmers reach everywhere in the country? Then we'll start asking the question, oh, they don't have the capability to supply. But there are independent people. Could we connect the pieces of the puzzle who can market incentives, who can actually connect them? So the DPI is about making people come together and institutions come together to actually solve something. So you are asking the question, what is the roadway you can give so that they are connected? You are asking about the digital roadways that makes connection. And you also, by the way, Alim, you also had a question in the chat about the privacy. So that question about decentralized emit of open data is all our open data is at source, completely anonymized and what you call removed of confidentiality data. We are only talking about a standard set of, we are creating standard set of minimum metadata, open metadata, that an urban system, medical system, agri system, health system. And we are very interestingly, I was speaking to a bunch of our friends at Harvard, and they were seeing a telephone data, not actual call data, simply the fact that how many people are connected to a tower, telecom tower. From day to day, I can tell you where the disease is going to spread. So it's a health guys are saying I can use telecoms tower connection metadata, not you and I are connected, how many people are connected and what geographies are being connected. I can tell you how this disease is going to spread. So it's very, very interesting. You cannot make an assumption that health guys need health data. You will be surprised. Health guys also need environment data. They also need the sanitation data. They also need drinking water quality data, because health, all these are multidimensionally complex problems in society, right? Societal problems. So that is why these decentralized emits are a very powerful way to think about, not a vertical way to think about solution, rather saying that if something happens, what minimum information would you want that it to emit into ether? And that allows us to now suddenly see observability of the system. Now we can observe something that is happening, and society can observe something is happening, like air quality index, and that changes the next make change. That changes dialogues. That changes the energy levels and regulators and policymakers' necessity to make changes. If the data itself is missing, you can't even see. If we can't see, we can't solve. We keep saying that, right? So seeing is a starting point for solving. So a lot of that is fundamental. So there are good DPIs to start. I would think some basic open data is a great DPI for environment to start with, by the way, I would think. And if you can even get every part of government systems and public systems, including private. I'll tell you an example. One of the foundations here in India, one of the billionaires who has a foundation, who has given a lot of money to the foundation, philanthropy, wanted to put sensors. Now cheap sensors are available. So they were saying, we want to put sensors everywhere, just simply emits data. So we were telling them not to think about the whole solution, that our people will buy sensors, our people will go install the sensors, our people will collect the data, and our people will analyze the data, and then we'll put out good papers, research papers. I said, this is not going to happen. This is a very bad way of thinking. Instead, think about saying that what can you incentivize the local community to put out the sensor instead of you buying the sensors? Can you incentivize the local community and fund that on an OPEX model? So you can say, these villages, if your sensors are up and running, I'm going to incentivize you on that. And let those sensors come about. So we changed their model to put air quality sensors everywhere they wanted to put up. Instead of a monolithic solution thinking, we said, think simply one thing you can do to incentivize, so that at population scale, people will rush to buy sensors and put it out. That would be great, because that now suddenly changes the data in my house. I can emit quality data. Suddenly that changes the next change that triggers next change. That's what we are after.